Hello, my name's Dominic Hill. I'm the Artistic Director of the Citizens Theatre and the Director of Cyrano de Bergerac. I want to thank everybody who's come along to see the show and also for submitting some questions and some thoughts about the show. And I hope very much that in my answers that will give you a greater understanding of what we were trying to achieve. I think one of the main themes of the play that we were exploring was the idea of pretense, of pretending, which is why at the beginning there were the children who were dressing up, pretending to be Cyrano and Roxanne. And I think that's a sort of strong element throughout the play, the sense that people are pretending to be something that they're not. So that for me was one of the main themes, and that sort of then spilled out in terms of how we presented the play, in terms of presenting the idea of people getting dressed for their characters, in terms of the kind of costumes that they wore. Of course, I think love is a huge element of the play, and I guess also the idea of sort of self-esteem, the idea of what you think of yourself. So Cyrano obviously is a character who thinks very well, he thinks in some ways, I think he's quite arrogant, but when it comes to actually his own personality, what he looks like, he obviously is very, very insecure. And in the same way, Christian is someone who looks great, but I think also has his own insecurities. So I guess one of the reasons that makes the play modern and relevant is that sense of who we think we are versus what the outside world thinks of us. And I think, you know, we live in a world where image and, you know, body image and that kind of thing that feel very relevant. And so that was certainly one of the reasons why we wanted to put this show on, because I felt it had a very strong resonance for a modern audience. So we probably start working on the design of a show about 3 to 6 months before we go into rehearsal. So a long time. There's a lot of discussion with me and the designer. We come up with different ideas about what the design might be, what that might look like. We create pictures, we create a model, and a certain amount of time before rehearsal, some of the set and some of the props actually get made so that we're ready for when we actually start rehearsal. So there's a long build-up to any production that we do. So I tend to like to do shows that involve a lot of music, that I suppose are quite big in terms of staging, in terms of the amount of people who are on stage. And to begin with, I'm working on the text, so we're trying to work out exactly what the text means, particularly in this play, which has some quite difficult language. So we work out what the text means, what the characters' intentions are at the very beginning. We might do that sitting down around a table, and then very quickly though we get up and we work on staging the play, on working out how it kind of fits together, how the intentions, how the actions, how the story is made clear through the staging. And then also at the same time, in this particular process, we had the composer and we had the musical instruments, the people playing the music in the room at the same time. So as part of the way of how do we tell this story, we're also going, how does music inform the storytelling at the same time? I'm also working with a choreographer and Callie, so she is inputting at the same time into maybe how people move, how characters move, how groups of people move, that kind of thing. So I think of it as a sort of layering, that you're starting with the basics about what actually does it mean, what are the characters' intentions, and then you're just layering it up and layering it up and layering it up. Particularly with a show like Cyrano, where you've got 14 people on stage nearly the whole time, so there's a lot of actually, so it's a quite slow process of actually working out how all those people are going to help tell that story on stage. the first scene in the original is tricky because you're introduced to a whole load of characters who you then don't see again. And also in the original, there's about 20. There should be about 20 characters on stage. So we weren't actually able to do that because we didn't have that number of people on stage. So the first scene, at the very opening, is a sort of just, in some ways, it's just an introduction to the idea of theatre, an introduction to the idea of play, of characters putting on different roles, becoming different roles. So I guess it's a bit abstract at the very beginning, but it was basically this idea of creating a world of theatre. And the children at the beginning, that idea came from, there's a conversation that happens later in the play between Roxanne and Cyrano, where they both talk about how they used to play as kids. And I just wanted to introduce the idea of play through, as it were, children playing as they had done when they were children. When I'm making a piece of theatre, I think I like to be able to say, to be able to be clear to the audience going, this is theatre, it's not film, it's not naturalistic, we can't try and make everything as if it's literal and realistic, like you get in a film. So we just extended that idea actually to Cyrano's nose. Everyone knows, boom, that of course it won't, unless I found an actor with a very large nose, that it's going to be fake, it's going to be false. So instead of trying to create some kind of perfect prosthetic, I thought, well, let's just be obvious about it, that it's fake, and it's part of how the actor creates the role. Roxanne is an interesting character because I think she starts off in the play as someone who is rather selfish, is rather pretentious, but actually she learns through the play that there is more to love and there's more to a human being than what's on the outside. But actually, ironically, I don't think she's someone who is very interested in fashion. I think very trendy, very fashionable, and that was reflected in her costume. I think she would have turned up on the battlefield almost unaware of the fact that she was wearing an extraordinary piece of clothing, but I think her intention is completely altruistic. She's there with food, and she's come to find her husband to tell him how much she loves him. So although it might, I can see how you might think it is insensitive. I certainly don't think that she would have thought she was being insensitive. But I think also that Roxanne is a character who learns, who isn't really aware of the realities of the hardships of life. But actually, I think if she is unaware when she turns up, I certainly think by the time that she leaves, she's seen her husband die in front of her, she's seen a war going on, she's seen how poor and starving everyone is. I think she will have learned something very much through that experience. But she does come with loads of food, she does come in order to, as you say, cheer them up. Also, I think there's a nice resonance with in the Second World War, you used to get people like Marilyn Monroe and Hollywood stars who would go to visit the overseas troops, and I think that was the sort of idea that we were trying to create as well. That she was, it was like a Hollywood star turning up in the middle of a battlefield. One of the wonderful things about Cyrano is that it's an extraordinary kind of amalgamation of times. So it's a 19th century play set in the 17th century, which in our version is given a contemporary Glasgow setting. So the text itself already has that sort of weird anachronisms in it. So, they talk about body scans, they talk about, they use modern slang words. So that is already in the piece. So I guess by using mixtures of costumes and mixtures of props from different times, we're just in a way expanding what's already there in the text. But again, I think also it's about storytelling. It's about going, Cyrano is poor, and all he has to eat is a packet of crisps and a bottle of iron brew. That tells us something about Cyrano, which is quick and easy in terms of storytelling for an audience. So that's why I like a lot using those kind of anachronistic things, because I think it gives you a direct and easy line to what's happening in the story and something about the character. I'm a huge fan of live music in theatre. I think it adds to the theatricality of the piece. I think it helps to say to an audience, look, this is live, this is real. And I don't like it so much like when you have a play and then you just have sort of piped in music. I always want to go, well, where's that music coming from? And there's something I think a lot more visceral and a lot more, you can sort of feel the experience more, like going to a gig or hearing a band or something like that. I think it really enhances that experience of going to a live event. This version by Edwin Morgan uses a kind of contemporary vernacular or contemporary Scots dialect, which is actually a mixture of modern slang. There's some Scots from all over the country, from different parts of the country. There's some more sort of high Scots within it. So I think it's a kind of celebration of the Scottish language, and I think I think what Morgan is doing is reflecting on the fact that when this play was originally set, so in the 17th century, actually those characters, if this play was set in Scotland, they would have talked in that kind of dialect. This idea of a kind of standardized posh English, was a kind of later invention. So I think that's one reason. I think another is actually to really help kind of ground the play in a setting, in a location that takes it out of a sense of a world that's all quite foppish and there's all sort of frilly shirts and again just helps it connect it to a modern audience, to the people of Scotland and Glasgow, and say these are actually about real people on the street. They're not people who live in kind of palaces. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about the character of Cyrano is that actually he's this this slightly edgy guy who he's poor, he's quite aggressive, he's arrogant. I mean, he's quite lovable, but he's very much, I think, a kind of man of the people. I think primarily I want the audience to have a good time at the theatre. I want them to experience a really good story. I think it's a fantastic story. I think it's this sort of strange mixture of comedy and romance and tragedy, and I think I want the audience to be able to laugh at the funny bits, but ultimately be really moved by Cyrano's story. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about this play. But also I think we've got 14 people on stage, we've got live music, there's dancing, there's great text. Hopefully it's visually exciting too. So I think my main aim was the audience had a really great night of theatre.